Welcome to the webinar. Again, today's webinar is going to be for quality for regulated lab environments. My name is Sean Burke from De Software. I'm going to take you through the presentation today for working with these compliance functionalities. So with FCS Express, we can give you a full secure environment where you can exercise control over the lifetime of your analysis. FCS Express allows customers to add add-on functionality to the software to help you meet CFR Part 11 compliance specifications. And we offer these in the form of the security add-on and the logging add-on. Now, importantly, these functionalities can be added to all versions of FCS Express. That means the RUO version, the IVD clinical version, that can apply to the flow cytometry version or the image cytometry version. So it's applicable for any sort of analysis that you might be doing in any sort of kind of iteration or flavor of the software. And keep in mind that new and existing FCS analysis can be brought into licenses with the security or logging add-ons enabled. So if you've already done some sort of analysis and you're looking at getting into a 21 Part 11 compliant mode, you can take those analysis and move them over. We do see many customers who work in a kind of standard RUO, non-validated package, and then they bring that over to FCS Express with these add-ons enabled when they're ready to kind of go through that analysis a little further. So how does FCS Express help meet compliance for you? FCS Express itself, it's a software. It's not going to tell you how to set up your procedures, but it allows you to set up compliant procedures based off of the tools that we have, like secure logging into the system, control over every action in the program for both individual users and specific layouts. And we're going to look at all this today in just a few minutes, including also data validation, history and audit trails, security policies and notifications, as well as electronic signing of documents. So there's a lot that goes into CFR 21 Part 11 compliance. You can see here we have a little link up here. If you go to the De Novo Software website and type in CFR Part 11, you're going to be jumped to a page that has this matrix. And really what this matrix is a summary of all the rules in CFR 21 Part 11 and how FCS Express helps meet those compliance strategies. Right? So there's a lot of these things that are kind of obvious, right? Access limitations. FCS Express contains security features that limit access to authorized individuals, right? Creating users and having password protection. Things like audit trails, in that the audit trails are secure and they're timestamps and they record the date and time. So really every one of these summary of rules that are located in this matrix, FCS Express has a way to work with that using, if both the security and logging add-ons are enabled in the software. So you might be wondering, all right, well, who uses this stuff, right? Who's using the security and logging packages for FCS Express? Well, it really runs the gambit, right? We have pharmaceutical researchers, big companies, CROs, smaller private research labs who are, kind of gearing their work to move up into larger projects. Of course, many clinical labs are using this, and even academics, right? There's a lot of folks who are doing kind of translational work or, work that's moving from the academic lab to the pharmaceutical world or CRO world. So really, there's many more kind of combinations where this stuff is taking place. But I think the important thing is, if you have some sort of need or you're thinking that in the future your lab might have some sort of need to be in some sort of, GMP, GLP environment where CFR 21 Part 11 compliance is important, it's good to start taking a look at FCS Express now, even before you get there. Now, in terms of compatibility, keep in mind that FCS Express, even when you have these add-ons working, it's going to work the same way it always has. We're going to read data from all flow cytometers. We're also going to read data from a wide variety of image cytometers, things like the Amnis, Salomix, Nexcelom, TissueGnostics, all of those image cytometry packages, everything that we're going to go over today applies. I also want to point out that there's special compatibility with the MaxQuant MQD files, with BD Accuracy C6 files, Nexcelom.nxDAP files, Amnis, DAF, and CIF files, right? There's a lot of different file types that are out there that are not .fcs files. And the reason I bring it up is because, we've had a number of clients that have come to us and said, well, I'm working with the .mqd file format from MaxQuant. If I want to get that into some other software, I have to export that to an FCS file. And that, raises some compliance concerns because you're taking, some sort of intermediary file type, you're doing a conversion to another file, so you have to do additional tracking for that. And what we do in FCS Express, because of kind of the partnerships that we've had with these companies, is we can read those files directly. And that way we don't have to work with some sort of intermediary file to get that to an FCS file to bring into the software, which just adds an extra step of complexity when you get into compliance. So do keep that in mind. These instruments that these files come from are excellent. I mean, of course, all of our kind of partners and compatibility instruments are really great, but this really does help for a lot of folks using those specific tools. So let's talk a little bit about these add-ons in particular, and then we're going to jump into FCS Express, and we're going to go through some of them and how they work in context in the software. So the first add-on, security, right? So what does security do? Well, it allows user-based security at the primary level, right? So each user has their own login, they have their own password. Passwords can be, changed. There can be force change. There's password expirations, right? We have all of that capability in the software. That can also be enabled, rather than just using the FCS Express system where you define a username and a login for something. What you can do is use LDAP or SSO. We do have an add-on functionality to FCS Express. It's kind of in addition to security. If you already have a LDAP system or SSO system, single sign-on, that's in place at your institute, you can get that add-on from FCS Express or from De Novo Software, and you can add your users to FCS Express, integrating directly into that system, and it makes everything a lot easier from a system management perspective, and probably also from some compliance perspectives. Now, when we add security users, we have to have the ability to allow certain users to do certain things and other users to not do certain things. So somebody who's an administrator of the system, we want them to have permission to do everything in FCS Express. However, somebody who's kind of a technician who's performing an analysis that day, you might want to limit, right? Maybe they can't move plots, maybe they can move gates, but they can't delete things, right? So what we do in FCS Express is we have a list of permissions that defines what action can be performed by the members of a group. So you can set up a number of different security users, you can assign them to different security groups, and at each level, they'll have different access to different functionality in the software. And really, every action in FCS Express can be controlled. You're going to see this when we pull up the security group list or the permissions list, that really every single click on a button in FCS Express can be allowed or disallowed for any level of user. So you can create different levels of access for different levels of users within the software. Now, a very similar structure applies to the layout itself, your analysis template. So we have layout-based security, and that allows you to define functionality for a particular layout or analysis. So it's very similar to the permissions that are available for a security group, but they only apply at the layout level. And in the event that a layout belongs to a layout security group that restricts a certain action, but the user is part of a user security group that has permissions to perform that action, the action won't be allowed, right? So it's kind of two different levels of security. So you can imagine, you have a layout, and in that layout, you're not allowed to, say, move a quadrant, but a particular user is allowed to move a quadrant. Well, if that user comes into the layout is secured so that nobody's allowed to do that sort of thing. And again, we're going to come back in and take a look at that in the software itself. Now, the other part of CFR 21 Part 11 compliance, another major functionality there is audit trails, right? So audit trails are intended to track every single action that you perform in your layout and to save that and timestamp it and link it back to somebody. And logging in FCS Express allows that at both the layout level and the system level. And so, the layout level, it's very straightforward. Really, every single action that you perform, you move a text box, you move a gate, you add new data, all of that stuff is tracked. We'll take a look at the audit trails in a bit. But we've also just added system level audit trails to FCS Express. So the latest release that has come out in just the last week or two, the last week in January 2021, the system level audit trails will be there. And that means that when you do things like add a user, when you save a layout, when you print a layout, when you change a preference in the software, all of that stuff can be tracked and reported. So that way, you know if somebody did something in an analysis and then they didn't save that analysis, but they printed it out, and that way you have a record of kind of tracking all of that. And it's a very important functionality that's been suggested to us and worked on by a number of our clients. So we do have some faith that it's going to be applicable to a number of different folks. Additionally, you're going to see electronic signatures in the software, administrative features, security configurations for how passwords and notifications are handled, full reports, and importantly, we have different options for databases. So if you think about it, when we create things like security groups and layout groups, we create signatures and things like that, we have to have some sort of database to kind of keep track of all of this security information. So FCS Express is pretty flexible. We do have the ability to work with our own database that we create, but we do really recommend that folks are using a SQL database. There's a lot of different ways that FCS Express can connect and work with that. And again, our team can help you figure out what is the best database option for you. And I think the last thing before we jump into some data is also that we have IQ OQ available for purchase upon request. So if you do want to run, in addition to logging and security, if you want to run a full kind of review of FCS Express with an IQ OQ, you can contact our team and we'll be able to help you out with that. So as I say here, let's jump to FCS Express to review some of this functionality that we talked about. So I'm going to hop out of PowerPoint here and I'm going to launch up FCS Express, and we're going to take a look at some of the security and logging functionality that's available within the software. So on my other screen, FCS Express is launching, and I'm going to pull this over here so we can take a look at it. And you can see that when I started up FCS Express, the first thing that I get when I have the security and logging functionality enabled is a login screen, right? Very simple. We have to log into FCS Express using some sort of login name and password. When you're using a standard version of FCS Express with this, it just opens up. So this way, you're tracked going into the system. You have to enter in those credentials to get in here, and I'm going to open up a layout that we had already created, that we had worked on, so that we can take a look at some of this other functionality. So keep in mind, today we're not super interested in, what's going on in this layout in terms of the science and the biology, although it is always interesting. You can see that it is live updating, right? This is some actual FCS file data within FCS Express, but we're really interested in, how do we set up users? How do we, work with these security groups and things like that? So when I'm logged into the system, I'm logged in as an admin, or really anybody who has permissions to add users can do this sort of thing. We store all of the kind of security and logging information in our file tab. So the way that we can add users into FCS Express is by clicking on the file tab, security, and clicking on user administration. And you can see that I have two users set up in the system. One is the default administrator user, One is an additional user that I set up here for myself called Sean Burke. And if we ever edit or add users, we can simply click add. And this is the FCS Express system for adding and creating users, right? We'd enter some sort of login name, we'd enter some sort of password for that person, we give additional information if needed for that person. But very importantly, down here, you can see that when you add a user, they can be put into some sort of group, right? So in this case, I have a group for a technician and I have a group for an administrator. And we're going to come back and talk about what those groups actually mean. But really what I've done here is an administrator can do anything in the software, and a technician is going to be limited to just a few actions. I disable that the user can't delete a page, that they can't modify a marker. So that way you can see how that works when we get back to that within the software itself. So adding the users is very straightforward, right? I mean, it's just like adding a user anywhere else. If you have the LDAP functionality enabled in FCS Express, so if you have that additional add-on, you'll see this button, Add from LDAP. And when you click on that, you're going to be brought to a specific dialog where you can search your LDAP system for specific users. You can add them to the FCS Express user list. You're going to get logged in, with your domain credentials. If you're using single sign-on, if you've opened up your computer and you've logged into your system, well, when you open up FCS Express, it's going to plug into all of that, and you're not going to be prompted to log in because you're already logged in through the domain in your computer. So again, what we see here is, if I edit this user, Sean Burke, they've been set up. They're in the technician group. So let's go take a look at our groups and see what that actually means. So all of our security groups are handled in the security actions here, and we can click on security group definitions. And you can see here that we have two groups set up. And now these are the groups that were available to the two users that we put in the user list, right? So I've seen labs, sometimes they have, 2 levels, they have 3, sometimes, they have 4 or 5. It really depends on, what type of work you're going to be doing in your environment, what types of, limitations and access checks you actually need. But what we do here is if we add or if we modify a group, you're going to see that we have the ability to name that group, so whatever we want to call that group for somebody else down the line. And I said here, include all permissions except those checked below. So that means, any of the permissions that are in the software, allowing edit preferences, importing user options, layout operations, saving layouts, saving as PDF. I mean, there are many hundreds of permissions that are in here that, again, control every sort of aspect for working with an FCS Express, right? So if you don't want somebody to be able to perform compensation, well, you can disable being able to perform compensation. But what we've done for this particular user is we've just done a few things. We said that they are not allowed to modify a marker. So later on, if I come in and I see this marker over here in our green histogram, I shouldn't be able to move it when I'm logged in. When I come in here, I shouldn't be able to delete a page if I'm logged in as a technician. So again, any of these things can be allowed, they can be disallowed. If you're working with a complex set of permissions, you can save these permissions to a file. You can save the group to a file. You can load these back in and you can kind of edit them. So if you have different iterations of, what type of permissions you need, folks find that a useful way to kind of build up those permission groups. So when it comes to those permissions, if you remember what I discussed, it's not just based on the security level. So for users logging into the system, for any particular layout, like the one I have open here, you can also apply those definitions or those layout, those kind of group information to the layout itself. Now this is controlled here. It's controlled here in the security tab in our layout status definitions. And when I pull this up, it's going to look very much like our security groups did, right? We have layout status definitions, we have an unrestricted group, right? All functionality is enabled. We have a layout specific block here. And again, if I add or modify this, what you can see is it's pretty much the same list. There's actually a few things that are not in this list, concerning login operations and things like that, because that's not specific for a layout. But very simply, if I say, in this layout, you should never be able to show a quadrant on a plot, well, that will be specific to this layout. When we save this layout, when somebody comes in and they open this up, they will not be allowed to insert or create a quadrant. So again, if we take a look at that, the way that this looks is if I select a plot, or if I select any plot and I say try to insert a quadrant, FCS Express says the operation is not allowed in this layout. You don't have permissions to do this, right? And that will go with any of the sort of actions that you block. So if you block moving a gate, as you move that gate, it's going to put up that check and it's going to show you that you don't have permission to do that. And the way that the layout permissions are applied to a plot, it's in a little bit different place. It's in this info tab here, or this info category. And when we go into the layout options, that is where we can access the layout status. And it's going to show us what we should be able to do or not do for the specific layout. So again, you can see here, I checked that we have the layout specific blocks being applied, and that way anybody who comes in and uses this layout in the future within your security system will not be able to insert a quadrant on any of the plots. So again, very kind of an important functionality there. But let's get logged out and logged back in as a new user. So I'm going to log out of the administrator account. I'm going to say I don't want to save anything about that just now. FCS Express is going to pop up my login screen again, and I can log in as a different user. So in this case, I'm going to log in not as an administrator, but as Sean Burke, and I'm in the technician group, if you remember. And we're going to take a look at, what this functionality looks like for somebody who falls into a different security group. So again, if you remember in the specific layout, I'm not allowed to insert quadrants, right? We kind of went through that. But if you remember with this person's permissions, this technician is not allowed to delete a page. They're not allowed to move a marker. So in the previous case, I was going to be able to allow to move that marker, but you can see it says the operation is not allowed for this specific user, right? You don't have permissions to do that. I can add a page, right? Because I have permissions to do that. But if I right click on a page and I try and delete it, I'm gonna have the block here that you do not have permissions to do that. So again, working with these permissions, every sort of functionality, everything that you can do in the software, right down to, changing the font and the formatting and things, all of that can be blocked, and you're going to be certain that the people that are working in your layout are doing the things that they're supposed to do and nothing else. Okay. So another functionality that we want to take a look at here is the audit trail functionality, right? So I mentioned that we have a full audit trail within FCS Express, and this is located within the info category here, and we click view layout history. And what you're going to see is that this is actually a very old analysis template, right? This was created way back in May 2016. But we've been tracking since May 2016 every single action that has been performed within this layout, right? So there's been some fonts that were changed, slides were formatted, things like that, all the way down to today, where I added a new page in this layout just now. And what you're going to see is that, when we log these audit trails, we capture every sort of information that can be done with this, right? So if we resized a text box or the width of something like that, it's going to record what the width was before, what the width and height was after, and we're going to be able to have all of that audit trail history for us wherever we want to start from. Now, when you're ready to export this audit trail, because you need to come back and have some sort of way to review this data in the future, especially when somebody comes in and starts auditing your work, well, you have the ability to print this and you have the ability to save this as a PDF. And I'm going to save it as a PDF because I know that this is a rather long audit trail. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to pop up what that history report looks like. And again, you can see, right, we've been doing this since 2016, so it's 110 pages. I hope your audit trails don't have to be that detailed, but they can be if they need to be. But this is what that audit trail looks like, right? It's going to show us, going back as far as the information we have, dates, times, who did these things, what they did, the steps that they did them. And that way you have all of this in either electronic format, or again, if you want to print, you can have that in a printable hard copy format as well. So I'm going to close out of the audit trails there. And the other thing I want to point out is our system level audit trails, but that's also going to pull me through here to show you where we have our security configuration. So if I go into my security category here again, there's something called edit security configuration, right? It's one of the last buttons we didn't click on yet today. But what the security configuration is going to allow us to do is set things like password policies, right? We can change the number of days before users have to change their passwords, failed login attempts before accounts are locked, all the kind of standard things that you'd be looking for. And we even have mail notifications. So if you want to know when somebody's, had an unexpected logout, when they've, failed typing in the correct credentials, you can set up the SMTP server, and you can set up the mail notifications to go out. Previously, I talked about LDAP, right? If we want to enable LDAP, this is where the LDAP gets enabled. We essentially check the box and we put in the information we need for our system. But importantly, since I was talking about audit trails, I want to talk about these system level audit trails, which are new to FCS Express. So we have the ability to enable system level audit trails. They're turned off by default. Not everybody wants to do this or has the bandwidth to do it. But if you want to turn it on, you can turn it on. And you can also require a reason for change. And I'll show you what that reason for change looks like real quickly. I'll just change this institution name to my webinar today. And what's going to happen is, because I'm logging all of these system level actions, things that apply across FCS Express as it's installed on your network, it's going to prompt me for why did you change this, right? And I'm going to say my institution name has changed, and that is going to be recorded within our system level audit trails. Now, the way that you access those system level audit trails is we go into the File tab here, and we go into Security again. And here's the last button that we didn't cover yet today, are these reports, right? So there's a lot of different reports that you can generate in FCS Express about who's logged in and who's logged out and things like that. But importantly, the all system level audit trails is what's going to be tracking what's going on at the system level when you're working within FCS Express. So you can see here that I've gone in and I've enabled the audit trails. I did this just a few days ago so we could have a look at a few different things that have happened on the system. And you're going to see that, in previously I'd come in here, and let me get out of that, make this a little bit bigger. I had changed the institution name previously, right? And here's that reason for change that I put in there. I had changed something about the security group definition on the system. I added the technician group, and I added these security group permissions, right? So all of these sorts of actions, adding users, even things like when you save the layout, right? When a layout was open, so you can track who's been opening these things, who's been working on it. If a layout was closed without saving, that's another important action, right? Did somebody open up a layout, perform a whole bunch of actions, print something out, and then not save it, right? This is going to track that sort of situation. So you really have this fine grain ability to come in and track what's been happening between adding users to the system, what users are doing on the system, and keeping all that in some sort of way that if you want to, you can also come out and export this to Excel, to HTML as a text file, whatever is your choice of exporting that information. So the last kind of information I'm going to touch on today is the electronic signatures. So you may have noticed in this layout, I have a table here that's going to record things like signature names, the status, the signer, the date, the time, the time zone and the date and things like that. Well, all of our electronic signatures are covered here in the info category, right? So we have a little button here for electronic signatures. And the way that electronic signatures get set up is you first define a signature list. And you can see here that I have a signature list already defined. I have a signature for an administrator. I have a signature for a technician. And what these are telling me is that anybody who's in the technician group can sign this as a technician, right? Anybody who's in the admin group can sign this as an administrator. So if I have 5 technicians in my group and everybody is assigned to that technician group, all of them will be able to sign for this. And the way that we set these up is we just add whatever signatures we want. I'm going to call this dual role signature, and I'm going to say that technicians or administrators can do this, and I'm going to say that this is a signature for both levels of analysis, and that will create that particular signature for us to apply. Now we have in this layout, again, this little text box that's showing us the status, right? We see that this layout was never signed. But what we can do is if we come up here to that info tab, perhaps I'm done with my analysis today, I'm ready to sign off on this and send it to somebody else. Well, I can click sign. And if I click the text signature, I'm going to put in, my analysis is complete and ready for review. Well, I can sign this, and then it's going to prompt me to log in again, right? So to sign this, I do actually have to type in my username and my password again. I'll click login. And what we're going to see is that now that text box is updated. It says the layout has been signed. It's signed by Sean Burke. It has the date, it has the time, it has the time zone, and all of that information is included. And the way that we create these little signature tables, it's very simple. We insert a text box, right? There's nothing too complicated about the way that we work in FCS Express ever, really. You can right click in here and you can insert a signature table. So again, this is just going to kind of recreate the signature table I had. When I created this one at first, there was only 2 signatures in the signature group. And now I added that dual role signature, so we have that in there, right? And now we have all of our signatures tracked. So what happens here is, I save it. Anytime I need to come back, the signatures are going to be there. And also, importantly, if I come back to my info tab and I look at my layout history, we're going to see that electronic signature in the books, right? We're going to have it in here. It says signature list change, right? I actually added a signature, and then I went and I signed it, right? So the tech was signed by Sean Burke. My analysis is complete and ready for review. That's stored with this layout. It's stored with this audit trail forever. So, when I come back, say 5 years from now, and I need to look at who did this analysis and when, that information is stamped, it's stored, and it's stored securely and encrypted within the layout in FCS Express. So again, all of the functionality that we're used to working with or that we want to work with in FCS Express, we're essentially covering that. When you add on security, you're going to have access to the security category. You're going to be making use of the user administration, the security configurations, either layout and security group definitions or both, and making use of the reports if you're looking at the system level audit trails. And when it comes to things like layout audit trails, right, you're going to be using the layout history. If you're going to be using layout permissions, you're going to be using the layout options. If you're going to be using electronic signatures, you're going to be using the electronic signatures buttons, right? So it is all very easy and very straightforward to access, to implement, and really it's up to you, again, as an end user, to figure out, how you're going to use these tools to meet compliance as you need them. So with that, I want to kind of summarize a little bit of what we talked about today. I do see a few questions came in here, and I can take a look at those in just a moment. But keep in mind that FCS Express offers this comprehensive security and logging system to support CFR 21 Part 11 compliance or analysis, right? So remember that this isn't set up that you're 21 Part 11 compliant if you just add these things onto the software. They're tools that are going to help you meet compliance by meeting the regulations laid out in that matrix that you need to implement at your site. And we do that by using the security groups that are going to allow you to kind of specify and leverage the permissions that are available for your various levels of users within your labs. Layout status definitions are going to allow you to provide an additional layer of security at that layout level. The electronic signatures are going to be used to indicate various states of the analysis and who signed and completed work and done things. And the audit trails are going to capture very detailed information for every action performed within a layout for the lifetime of that layout, while the brand new system level audit trails capture those system level changes. And importantly, they're going to capture things like if somebody opened a layout, modified it, printed out a hard copy, but then didn't save the layout. Right? That's an important thing to track and an important thing to be able to audit, as well as any changes to the system in general. So keep in mind also that FCS Express can be configured to fit your needs and can be used with SQL databases as well as local folder databases. And what we do is we encourage you to reach out to us and help you figure out what you need in terms of SQL databases, what you need for number of users, what you need for add-ons. And eventually, once you have this implemented, or even, if you're just need IQ/OQ, we have that available to go through pretty much just about every action that you could perform in software in a guided way. So with that, I wanted to say thanks for coming out to the webinar. We'll take a few questions here in just a moment, but keep in mind that you can always download a free trial of FCS Express from our website. But importantly, if you want to take a look at these specific functions and features in the software, security and logging, you do have to contact us at sales or support@denovosoftware.com. And we'd be happy to set up a special demo that has the features activated that we discussed today. And again, what we can do is if you have questions about pricing, about how many users do you need, do I need security, do I need logging, do I need both, our team is always available to help out with that. So again, thank you for attending the webinar today. Contact us at support@denovosoftware.com. Give us a phone call. We'd be happy to take your questions and answer things at that point. So thanks again.